I mean, take sex. Most of us, when we're having sex, are not particularly thinking about our reproductive success, right? That's not what we're usually about. We're usually about having a damn good time
When
with
the
our booze.
world's come over you, and what in heaven's name have you done? You've broken the speed
When
of
I was
sound
growing
along
up
the
in the mid to late 20th century, political alignments were described by major figures like Joe McCarthy, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan as one side being communists, while the other side represented freedom. These labels represented false mythologies and were used as tools by the established power structures to maintain and extend their power. When other figures, such as Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and James Baldwin, began speaking eloquently against the white racist power structure, the label used against them by figures led by J. Edgar Hoover, Strom Thurmond, George Wallace, Joe McCarthy was communism, because that was the most effective tool available at that time to demonize the opposition. This ideological alignment at that time resulted in the disastrous undeclared wars in Korea and Vietnam. It remained a viable rhetorical tool for Ronald Reagan well after Vietnam, until Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev ended the Cold War with the simple declaration that we are not enemies, so let's be friends. Since that time, the two ideological camps floundered in their attempts to invent labels that sufficiently demonize the other side. I dare not try to list all those labeling attempts because our producer's head is already set to explode, so I will go straight to where I believe we are now. Two camps, one represented by human decency, and the other which champions human cruelty. I now invite Doug Heinrichs to this discussion to weigh in first with the critique on my belief that the two ideologies which represent American politics today is simply those who want either decency or cruelty. Doug?
Well, I think you're right that that's where it has ended up. But I think the interesting thing is how that comes about. And I think there's both a kind of a sociological divide that reflects a deep psychological schism in all of us. And the sociological divide is between ideologies that essentially are communalism, the notion that we're all in this together and that what's good for the common good, what's good for all of us, is good for each of us. On the other hand,
So
there's
it's somewhat in the communism freedom
well,
thing,
in the
right?
theory, now, yeah,
Yeah.
communism has a very specific notion about how to do that, but all socialism all has a communal viewpoint. But we've always had that's part of it's inevitable. We have that. We're in it together. On the other hand, uh, there's this individualistic within the society. Uh, there's this social Darwinism of hey, the strong are going to win and they should win because they deserve it and get ahead and you beat the other guy, and it's a very individualistic thing, and it's very strong in our society. But I think if you look at where all that comes from, in human nature there are these two sides of us. There's We evolve, and they're evolved. I mean, from an evolutionary point of view, on the one hand, it's easy to see where the individualistic dog eat dog comes from because, hey, you want to be an alpha, you get ahead, right? But it's also true from an evolutionary point of view that populations are going to thrive better and reproduce more if they cooperate, particularly in a species like us, where as individuals, even the strongest of us is pretty weak without the support of the social group. So we both so you have these two very contradictory things that have evolved. And I think all of us have both sides. The communal takes the view that if we all work together, the pie can get bigger for everybody. The individualistic approach is essentially a sum zero game. If I win, you lose. That's how it goes, right? Uh, and we have those we battle within us those two sides. And I think which one wins has something to do with our individual natures, just our temperament, but also what's dominant in our current society. Some societies really push, and I think our country has tended to push an individualistic view generally. Um, but the thing to remember is that any behavioral pattern that evolves, the mechanism that that behavioral pattern is reinforced by is making it pleasurable. I mean, take sex. Most of us, when we're having sex, are not particularly thinking about our reproductive success, right? That's not what we're usually about. We're usually about having a damn good time because it feels good. So things evolve. What motivates us is pleasure. And evolutionarily, things that are good for survival, may not be good for us as individuals, tend to become pleasurable. That's how it works. And I think the same thing is here true too. I think the people who have a communal orientation, there are pleasures in that. There's pleasures in love. There's pleasures in caring about other people. There's pleasures about empathy. These can feel very good. On the other hand, dominance and power and control can feel damn good. And I think the problem is that dominance urge can turn to cruelty, especially in people who feel impotent or cheated out of their status. So they want those pleasures of dominance. They're not getting them, and they feel they've been screwed out of something they deserve. And so their pleasure is going to come from it's revenge, sticking it to the other person who they think has put them down. Both sides can feel good. And it's sort of a battle in human nature. And I think what's happened is that has been currently extremely polarized.
Wow, that's pretty much how I figured it was. But before I let you go on this, can you kind of give us the thread of how it really became this way so significantly now, as opposed to what it was, or maybe it was always that?
Well, I think it shifts, and there actually, and I'm blocking on the historian's name. There's a well-known historian who recently published a book arguing that in American history there is a shift about every 60 years from a heavily communal perspective to a heavily individualistic perspective. Because what happens is the individualistic perspective sounds real good for a while, but there are so many losers in that battle that
Mm-hmm.
after a time, uh, society says enough. He cites the period, individualistic time was the early 20th century up into the 20s, but then you saw the pushback, unionism, the need to provide rights for people, and so on and so forth. And then you saw a shift to a more communal view, starting with the Depression, going through World War II. But then then when people started taking for granted the communalism, then everybody got interested in their own individual success. Even the 70s, the love children were really about doing whatever made you feel good. It was a very individualistic thing. And we since then, with neoliberalism and all this neoconservatism, that's been dominant again. Now, the encouraging things we're about at that 60-year mark. So it might start shifting the other way because it's becoming so untenable. The individualistic thing, people are starting to see the brutality of it some, and at some point there'll be a pushback. So I think it shifts. Now I think what happens was so many people felt disenfranchised by you can only buy into the communal thing if you really can see that the common good is also good for you most of
Mm-hmm.
the time. And I think there's a big segment of our population who stopped believing that, who started to say, I'm just being screwed by the people who claim to be out there thinking about the common good. And so I think, and the Republicans jumped on that. And I think the Democrats are at fault for letting that misperception by not listening to many people
Well,
and being
not
out of
doing
touch
anything about it,
and
by
not doing
making the
anything.
claim, but not really producing that
Exactly.
good for the individuals.
Right.
I think, Doug, if we go back to the first show that you joined with Thaddeus. I think you cited that historian. So we'll have to
I
go
think
back
I
to the
did. I don't know if I cited him
yeah,
by name then, but anyway,
I think you did. Yeah.
I may have. So I'm blocking him entirely. It's what happens to old guys. But yeah, but I think that's the thing, and I think the Republicans jumped up. I think the Democrats gave them the opening by not getting things done, sounding very hypocritical and out of touch, and the Republicans jumped on that with the individualistic thing. You know, it's dog eat dog. If you're a winner, we're with you. And I think that's kind of what led to this total polarization.
Along with the lie that, you go with me, I'm going to help you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly.
Okay, you segued into a nice thing when you mentioned revenge because a recent guest on NPR Science Friday was a lawyer and researcher named James Kimmel, who wrote a book on the neuroscience of revenge, where he claims that the desire for revenge is another form of addiction, which cannot be cured unless the patient recognizes it as an addiction and is willing to take the necessary steps, as all addicts must, if they want to beat it. Have you had any experience with that in your career? Revenge addiction.
Well,
And
I'll tell you. First of all, I'm frankly utterly unimpressed with this guy. I think he's largely a hype master and deals in pseudoscience. I mean, first of all, he's not a researcher. He's never
he's a lawyer. He's
Right.
an
He's
attorney.
never done any original research. He just has popularized in his own way other people's work. But and I think he, in a very self-promoting way. But I think to call it an addiction just muddies the waters. And for one thing, he doesn't understand how to interpret brain imaging. The fact that the reward centers light up when people were getting revenge, all that tells you is revenge feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Those centers are non-specific. Yeah, they light up when you're addicted. They light up when you look into your loving wife's eyes or look at your children or grandchildren. Those same centers light up. They're totally non-specific. They're simply indicating that you're experiencing an emotional reward by what you're doing. That doesn't define addiction. To me, the distinctive thing about an addiction is not that it's rewarding, but that it's pounding the reward centers so heavily that it numbs them to getting rewarded by anything else that should reward them. And you see this with the drug addict being the classic example. The drug addict stops getting pleasure from treating his family well, working at his career. I mean, everything drops out. None of it rewards him except the drug because it's so damn powerful. That's what makes it an addiction. The fact that it triggers a pleasure center just means it's pleasurable. And so I don't think it's a helpful concept. I don't think anything. Addiction's a hot topic right now, so you can make a lot of money pushing addiction. As
Well,
a
how about the revenge part? Is that something
well,
that is just kind of prominent, though, anyway,
you know,
even if it's not
yeah,
addictive?
yeah. I think revenge is very pleasurable. I mean, and I don't think calling it an addiction clarifies anything at all, but it is. I think we need to acknowledge that it is pleasurable. And again, because up to a point, evolution has selected for a certain pleasure in revenge. Because if we eliminate our enemies, probably better off, right? So there's a part of us that gets rewarded by revenge. And if that gets stoked by society, it becomes a really dangerous thing. And that's what I think we're dealing with now.
So it stimulates the pleasure centers
It
when we
still has a pleasure sense. One of the best students of revenge was the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote extensively about the human pleasure derived from cruelty. In fact, argued that we so much enjoy cruelty that if we're not allowed to be cruel to other people, we become cruel to ourselves. And that's pleasurable. He thinks that's the basis of the kind of depriving aesthetic ideal of Christianity. An interesting argument. But anyway, but I think he's very astute about the fact that cruelty brings a certain pleasure. We have evolved to enjoy that part of us that wants to be the alpha and put everybody else down. And the only thing against that is the other side of us that takes pleasure in our social connectedness with others, in our capacity for love and empathy. And those two are battling at each other all the time, in all of us.
In sports, war, and electoral politics, winning is a major component of those activities. Vince Lombardi said it's the only thing. Is it? Do you see any connection with winning and cruelty? I think you alluded to that a little bit here.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a tremendous connection because winning is about dominance. And all sports activities are sum zero games, right? I mean, there's a
Right.
winner and there's a loser, right? So, yeah, it's
And electoral politics.
and electoral politics. But our society has used sports as a model for how everything should go. We use it as a model for American business. We're gonna be part of a team, we're gonna win, we're gonna beat the other guy, right? Well, why? Why aren't we using the analogy of a symphony orchestra where we all work together to create a beautiful product and be done with it, right? I, there's no need for sports to be the model, but we have made it that. And I think it's done great harm to the American view of the world and ourselves. And yeah, I think it's a real problem.
Well, being a jock from way back and having the experience of using that activity to get good at something is kind of like an important aspect, I feel, of my personal growth. Um, Father Vernon Holtz was a huge component. We both had
I
that
know.
guy. He was our coach, and I mean, I think he wanted to push more for excellence.
Exactly.
So explain that.
He wasn't so much concerned about winning. I mean, for him, the purpose of this was your own personal development.
Hmm.
I mean, hey, I was about as lousy an athlete as there was, but Father Vernon put as much energy into getting me out there on the soccer field as the guys who were good, right?
Never
Because,
saw you out there on the soccer field.
well, I
He
was
must
pretty
have
good at
lost that.
eluding Father Vernon all those years, but he tried. Let me tell you, he tried.
Okay, I believe that.
But because his view was it was good for my personal development, not
Uh,
that he was going to turn me into a winner on the
mm,
soccer field. He wasn't. And I think if you approach sports that way, but you can approach a lot of things that way. Learning to be excellent at playing a musical instrument, acting, I think pursuing excellence is tremendously admirable, and there are a lot of pathways to that. That's great. But the winning, the viewing it as I've got to beat the other guy or nothing else counts, the Vince Lombardi attitude, right? I think it's really destructive.
that's the destructive part. Whenever
Yeah.
I was coaching my son at a YMCA basketball thing,
Hmm.
he was one of the better players, and one of the things that I insisted on was everybody got to play about an equal amount of time. And there was another parent there who saw that I had taken my son out of the game and put in this girl who was really not very good, but she needed to get her minutes in.
Right.
And he was so furious with me because we did not win the game. He said, "It's your son. He's on the bench. We could have won that game. You didn't put him in." And he was, that's a perfect example of that. I just thought
Exactly.
that's
And
like,
that's the attitude. And look at how many parents have that view, that
mhm.
even with little kid sports, that it's about the winning. And that's a very, very destructive way of thinking. And it starts to permeate thinking about everything. Yeah.
It's worldwide. I mean, look at soccer
Yeah,
across the world. Yeah.
absolutely.
One of St. Paul's most famous and definitely most quoted epistles is Corinthians 13, where he goes on at length to speak on the power of love. As a young husband and parent, I held that the belief that Paul was right about that. Because even in tough times, I felt the love we shared in our family unit was most powerful in that it served as the glue we all needed to keep things together. However, as I have grown much older and viewed humanity through the lens of the Tea Party, Rwanda, Islamic terrorism, domestic terrorism, the rise of Trump and MAGA, road rage, Israeli treatment of Palestinians, gun violence across America, etc., I've changed my view. I now believe that hate and anger are way more emotionally powerful than love. Please tell me, Doug, how I am wrong.
Well, the only way I I would disagree with you is that it de- I think which one is more powerful. It gets back to that idea that all of us are battling these two evolved tendencies in ourselves. The pleasure we get from loving and caring about others, and the pleasures we get from dominating others. And depending on the moment we're in society and the society we're in, it will encourage one of those to be stronger than the other. I don't think intrinsically that's the case, but that conflict of as far back as 1700s, David Hume and Adam Smith, the man who wrote who's seen as the hero of neoconservatives, who wrote Wealth of Nations. He
Mhm.
also was a moral philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he argued that capitalism needs to be tempered, and what can temper it is our intrinsic empathic tendency that's built within us. But that society has to nurture that. Society has to promote that. But it's there. And if it's done and people develop that, that can be the thing that keeps us caring about the common good and about one another, that can mute our selfish aggressive tendencies. So I think both are there. I think we're in a moment historically right now where the hatred is in the ascendancy. I think there's no way around that. I don't think it's always that way, and I don't think it has to be always that way. But it's a battle we now have to reconquer. Uh,
So, seeing the pendulum swinging back towards love.
I think it could. I'll tell you one of the things that has given me some encouragement, actually. If you've watched the approval ratings for Trump's immigration policy among the general public, including among Republicans, it's been dropping.
Mhm.
Um, as the overt, blatant cruelty has been in our face day after day, you're starting to see some people say, "Oh my God, this is horrific. This is not right." So I think those tendencies are in us if we can work to bring them out. But it's a challenge, and I think it's a battle we have to fight constantly because the forces of dominance and individual get-aheadness, they're powerful.
Very first orders issued by Trump 2.0 through Musk's Doge was the elimination of USAID, United States Agency for International Development. There were warehouses filled with rotting food and documented cases of children in Africa who've already died from starvation. The State Department has since destroyed 500 metric tons of food that was in a Dubai warehouse waiting for distribution, already approved by Congress. And they had to kill because it expired. They had to burn it up while all those people in Gaza are getting shot, waiting for food. The unwillingness to even deliver food already paid for with congressional authorization during the Biden administration, ready for transport, constitutes a cruelty that is tough for decent people to stomach. I just heard a study which issued an estimate that 14 million people will die from starvation in the next 5 years because of this action. Is it about saving hardworking taxpayers or hard earned money, or is cruelty for its own sake?
Mhm. Well, I think it's hard to deny its cruelty for its own sake. As you say, the amount of money to deliver food that's already there is trivial. Um, you
And
know,
they actually took money that was already approved by the Congress and they rescinded it.
and they rescinded it, right?
Every one of those votes to rescind that came from the Republican side of the aisle.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's y- y- yeah, I think it's wanton cruelty, and I think they're proud of it. I think one of the things that happens with this uh, individualistic ethos, uh, the social Darwinism ethos, is that being cruel is synonymous with being strong. I mean, one of the things that characterizes Trumpism is an obsession with being strong in his view of what a manly, strong guy is. And that means being cruel. I mean, if you're sensitive, if you care, then you're weak. And I think he feels a need to project, well, his fascination with wrestling. I mean, for Christ's sake,
Right.
yeah. I mean, this very strong equal cruel equal manly is the formula that he sells. And so demonstrating cruelty on his part, from his view, makes him look strong, and to a lot of his supporters makes him look strong. Yeah, it's a perverse equation, right? I mean, it really is, but that's, I think, how it operates.
I realize that the justification for killing 60,000 residents of Gaza is collateral damage required to destroy Hamas. I understand that's what they're saying. But I don't see how shooting unarmed, starving civilians at food distribution stations fits into that justification. Just yesterday, they killed over 100 people standing there. Over 100 people just in one day at one place. Have you heard any explanation, Doug, as to why the Army commanders are issuing these orders to shoot on people with tanks and with their machine guns standing in line for food?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, again, it's wanton cruelty at one level, but I also think there are some other agendas behind this. I think Netanyahu and a good segment of his supporters, and certainly the Orthodox Jewish community there, uh, they really want to just clear Gaza of they really want to just empty it out and take it over. I think that's the ultimate thing. So the more they can terrorize, the more they can kill, the more they can drive people out, and they'll open it up for settlement by, you know, I mean, to me, it's so ironic that the most vehemently pro-violent segment of the Jewish population are the same segment that don't think their sons should have to bear arms and go and get shot at.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, it's easy to have that position if you don't have skin in the game, and they don't. So I think a lot of it's that, and then and I think Netanyahu, he's facing some serious legal things if he loses power. So I mean, I think he's taking that approach that if he keeps a war going, keeps things stirred up, he'll stay in power and he'll dodge his legal troubles. I think he's got a personal. I don't think he wants to see anything settled there because it's not in his best interest personally. I mean,
So you mentioned the Orthodox,
yeah.
the people who really are really pushing this.
Mhm.
Do you see a connection with the religious zealotry and cruelty?
Absolutely. Read the Old Testament. What did God tell him to do when he took him to the promised land? Wipe everybody out. I mean, it's just the modern version of the Old Testament, right? Uh, this is one of the things that I find so offensive about most organized religions is religion promotes an us against the other. That we are the good people, the other people are bad, evil, unworthy, and therefore we are, in God's name, gonna punish him, take him out, right? So I think that's a very intrinsic part of almost all religions. Whatever else they're preaching, even religions like Christianity that preaches love, 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 they were the same ones who ran the Crusades and the Inquisition, and away you go.
Yeah, eliminate the pagans.
Eliminate the pagans, those are bad people, right? Or eliminate the heretic, somebody who believes a slightly different version of our doctrine. Uh, Out with them.
Yeah, the witches.
The witches, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think the religious viewpoint, it justifies the cruelty. What it does is it cuts off that other side, the side where our conscience would say, "Oh my God, that's brutal. How can we do that to another human being?" Religion gives a way around that. And so you can kind of calm your conscience and say, "Hey, I'm doing God's work."
Yeah, because I'm certain what God wants.
I'm certain what God wants. Yeah, absolutely. And so, by God, I'm gonna stand for God, and I'm doing His work on earth, and away we go. And it takes away that opposing force that might civilize us if we let that opposing force come to the fore.
We talked about this earlier about the failures of the Democratic policies and what the Republicans have managed to get as far as convincing people. But don't you think, for the most part, that the Democrats, what they're saying, they represent decency, and the Republicans promoting cruelty? I'm reading a book by Leah Littman called Lawless. She's a law professor, and she is just coming up with all these things that the Supreme Court has done that just are resulting in cruelty, the way they treat the trans people, the way they treat the women's reproductive freedoms, the way they treat the voting rights and everything. And it seems like all about cruelty. And she keeps pointing the fact that these are the Republicans. She's not shy about saying
Mhm.
Republican appointed justices are always in this. So if we want to look at what I was alluding to earlier as far as the ideological alignment, the Democrats and the Republicans. Is that fair to put the Democrats in with decency and the Republicans in with cruelty?
I think by and large it is fair. Now, as you point out, the Democrats have been quite both ineffectual in bringing about those decent things, and they've been fairly hypocritical. But I think what they stand for is is decency, because they stand essentially for a communal view of life. They
Mm-hmm.
have a sense that we're in this together, right? And and at the most basic level, something like climate change. I mean, talk about being in it together,
Right.
right? But and the Republicans just say that's not true. We're not in that together. It's not a problem, right? So I mean, yeah, I think the Democrats stand for that togetherness feeling. Now, they unfortunately have not delivered, and I think that's some of the anger. Watching the two parties and how the public has reacted, it reminds me a little bit of what is a common thing in dealing with when I've dealt with patients who had been sexually abused, let's say by a father growing up. Obviously, they're not terribly happy with their father usually. But often they're much more outraged at the mother who looked like the caring person but didn't protect them,
Mm-hmm.
right? That there was a certain hypocrisy, that mother was ineffectual and hypocritical and stood by and let this go. And they're angrier at that than at the brutality itself. And I think something similar to that is happening now, where people, so many people are so angry at the Democrats because they haven't protected them. They haven't made things better. They haven't done those things. And so between the two parties, they don't like either one, many of them. I mean, no, real Trumpite people do. But there's a big segment of people who voted for Trump not because they think he's a great guy, but because they're just so damn angry at the Democrats,
Right.
right?
Aren't you tired of hearing politicians after another mass shooting or horrible Trump comment saying, this is not who we are as Americans? But doesn't the regularity of these atrocities prove the exact opposite of what they are claiming at the after event press conferences? I just think we are that way as Americans. We're
Right.
mean and we're cruel, and that is kind of like the American way. Look what we did to the natives.
That's right.
Look what we did to the African Americans that we brought over in ships. Look what we're doing right now to the Hispanics.
Exactly.
So, isn't that who we are?
Well, I think it is. And I think one of the things I'm always struck by people, because people do it on an individual level too. They do something terrible and they say, oh, I made a mistake. That was a bad judgment, but that's not who I really am. Well, we are what we do. Our character is defined by the cumulative behavior we demonstrate in the world, right? There is no other essence to who we are than that. But we kind of pretend there is, that there's something else. And again, another shot at religion here, but I think religion feeds that. I mean, the notion that, I can be a horrible person, but if I decide to have faith in Jesus, I'll be forgiven, right? Uh, or I'll go to confession if I'm a Catholic and I'll be forgiven, as if all that we did is erased. It doesn't matter. It doesn't define us. what does define us. That's the person you are. And you can choose to behave differently in the future, and then you sort of evolve into a somewhat different person, but it doesn't erase that part of you that what you did. And I
Well,
think
you use it. They're using it as an excuse to go ahead and do this bad behavior
absolutely.
because I'm with God, and
I'm with God.
God's
Yeah.
not
And
against me.
I'm not really this bad person. That's not who I am. This is not who we are. Well, yes, it is who we are. And I think you're absolutely right about that. It defines us because there is no other way to define our character than our actions.
What
That
we do.
what we do. There is no other definition of us floating around, some essential thing out there. That's what we are. Take it or leave it. That's it, right? But I think we dodge that because it puts too much, it holds us too accountable for our behavior. Nobody wants to be held accountable for their behavior.
So religion allows us to skirt around that.
Absolutely. It's one of the prime ways of skirting around that, just saying, well, that's not who I am, or I will be redeemed. God will forgive me, which has always struck me as so strange because it's easy for God to forgive anybody because we can't hurt God. What's the big deal? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's he have to forgive us for? We don't hurt him,
Right. Right.
right? So it's easy for him to say, hey, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, you're
The
forgiven.
forgiveness that counts is the one that was victimized by your.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
person who we should be dealing with is the victim, not God.
Right.
God's
Mm.
not the guy who got hurt. Um,
The success of our survival as a species is directly linked to the skill we developed as killers of other life forms as well as ourselves. The killers have a better survival rate than the killed. Is this meanness, cruelty, general passion for violence an attribute we need to make it in the natural selection process? Is it?
well, yeah. Well, I think partially yes. But again, here's where the two tendencies come up. Because given that the strongest human being on his own is quite weak in the larger scheme of nature, uh, our survival value partially depends on ability to kill when we are threatened or we need to eat, but it also depends on our ability to work together with our fellow creatures to survive. If we don't do that, I don't know how good a killer you are, you're not going to survive very well.
A
You're,
lot of times we work together to kill.
and a lot of times we work together to kill.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the problem is we work together to kill, and one of the ways we do that is by labeling the people we kill as an outgroup. And this
Mhm.
is not just humans. You see it in other primates. I mean, if you look at Jane Goodall's work on the chimpanzees and how they will attack another troop brutally, you know, they're other, and they work together. They cooperate beautifully in killing, right? So, yeah, I mean, we need to have some of that aggressive instinct. If we're totally passive, we're in trouble. But the best survival technique is that middle ground where, okay, we can be aggressive when we have to, but we also understand the value of cooperation with one another. And the problem is, as the world has gotten more global and our problems have gotten more global, we have to see the in group as ultimately expanding to include all humanity, right? It doesn't work anymore to say, the people in my village are the in group and the people in the next village are the out group, or this country and another country. This is why the whole America First thing is such a horrible position, right? We're all in this together, ultimately.
And that's really where we are now as far as the other group with the whole immigration and ICE and all that. And all right, which
And
brings us
even
to.
and even with the tariffs, I mean, what's Trump's position? We want to make the other guy. We're not trying to come up with a deal that's kind of reasonable to help world trade for everybody. It's I win and you lose, and
Right,
that's his strategy, right?
that deal. I win and you lose.
That's how he approaches everything.
Yeah.
And that's just a devastating strategy in our current world. The world is global whether we like it or not. I mean, for all kinds of reasons. And we ignore that at our own peril as a species.
But with this taco thing, he's losing all the time.
Well, he's losing all the time because you see, Trump only cares with what it looks like. Yeah, remember he started as a TV guy, right? I mean, he's a celebrity. He's not a substantive guy. So as long as he can sell it to his audience that, oh, he's a winner, he doesn't really care how it actually turns out. That's uh, except when his
Perception.
personal
He wants to be perceived as the winner.
he wants to be perceived as the winner.
And he's pushing it. Okay, we're going to wrap this up here. Now, you talked a lot already about our need to be more communal and to have our objectives be for the common good. So, is there any specific suggestions that you have that may, and I know you think about this stuff.
Oh
So,
God, yeah. Unfortunately, it's a lot easier to make the diagnosis than to come up with the cure. Uh, but it does seem to me a couple of things. I think we need to generate forums, and I think this does best on a small, kind of more personal scale in our town or in our community or our neighborhood, to talk not so much about politics, but about what are our underlying values, and do we share the same values, and what do those values look like that we
well,
can.
that's what Kiana was kind of saying last time we got
Yeah.
together. Was that have these kind of forums where we are doing
Yeah,
that
and I think she's
communication.
right.
Yeah.
And but I think not so much about politics, about Democrats versus Republicans, but about you know, that it's that we can find some shared goals that we all would espouse. We might disagree about how to get there, but if we at least start by saying, yes, that's a goal, and understanding that that being strong should include the capacity to compromise, that being strong should include the capacity to care about others, that strength doesn't mean you have to be some kind of a brutal, macho animal, uh, that being needy in this society is not automatically blameworthy, that people who have less are not necessarily bad people. One of the things behind the this kind of social Darwinism is the assumption that's never really stated, but is there, that anybody who can is going to want to put all their life energy into making as much money as they can. And so success means if you're successful, you're going to end up wealthy. If you're not, you end up poor. But our society requires to function well. It requires a whole bunch of people who choose to do things with their life that don't generate a lot of money. Teachers, social workers. I mean, you could down. I mean, and yet those people are treated like they're losers by this
And
crowd.
the idea that these wealthy people are happier than us.
Oh, they're
Very,
clearly not the case. They're
yeah.
clearly not the case, right? I mean, but again, we tend to, in this society, in our country, and even the European countries, I think, are quite different from us on this. In our country, we do not talk about happiness very much. We talk about success,
Mhm.
and that means financial success.
The measurement is money.
Right. And the assumption is if you have money, of course, you'll be happy. You don't have to figure out what would make life fulfilling to you. And there's something that I think we need to be working with our children on. I mean, these kind of values, what makes life worth living? I mean, and what gives it satisfaction? I mean, there's so many assumptions behind this kind of social Darwinistic approach that I think if they're made explicit, a lot of people can stop and say, hey, wait a minute, yeah, money isn't equivalent to happiness. And I mean, you look at the countries that rank happiest in the world, it's
Norway, Denmark, Sweden.
great. And these are countries that have a huge um, social safety net for everybody.
Right.
And they have huge tax rates. And you know what? By and large, the people are fine with that.
And they're not lazy.
They're not lazy. They work real hard, but they put a lot of their resources into the common good. And part of it is they do it in a way that reminds people it's the common good. If we have a program for free healthcare in this country, to the extent we ever have that, it's always needs-based. And so it leaves the people who are left out feeling like they're carrying the weight for somebody else. You go to Denmark, you're going to get free health care, whether you're the poorest guy in the country or the richest guy in the country, right? It's seen as something that everybody has a right to across the board. And that means we're all in it together. And I think that's much more acceptable to people. Uh, and if you don't have to worry about your financial security, there's a huge body of literature that shows that thinking about money in any context makes us meaner, more selfish, more inconsiderate of other people. I mean, to a remarkable degree. The experiment that always blows my mind. They did this psychological experiment where they had a bunch of people come in and said they were going to be interviewed for some kind of psychological survey. And everybody was asked the same questions, but the questions were irrelevant. The control condition was they were brought into a room, sitting at a desk across from the interviewer. And behind the interviewer was a computer screen that had a screensaver up. And one of them just had abstract shapes, and the other had dollar signs floating around all over it. And then at the end of the experiment, the person was told to go down to another room at the end of the hall. And they were going down, and they have somebody who was planted. Secretary comes out of an office and drops a big handful of pencils all over the floor. What they found is the people who were sitting there who were looking at the dollar sign significantly less inclined to help pick up pencils than the people who didn't see the dollar sign. That focusing on money, whether you have a lot or you don't have a lot, makes you a less nice person. It's an interest, and there's a whole bunch of literature that supports that. So in a country like ours, where there's no social safety net, we all have to be thinking about money. We're all worried about, are we going to go broke with health care late in life?
Housing, just are we going to be able to have a roof over our heads?
Or a roof over our head. But even, quote, successful middle-class people worry about, are they going to go broke having their spouse in a nursing home? Are they going to go broke with huge medical bills? Are they going to, all the things that we don't provide safety nets for, that don't just affect the poor, that affect everybody. It means we're all thinking about money way too much. And I think it's very bad for us.
Well, that's good advice. Don't think about money so much.
Yeah, but to do that, you have to give people a life where they can afford not to think about money as much, right? To know, hey, my kid can go to college. It's not going to cost me.
I'm not going to lose my house.
I'm not going to lose my house. If I get sick or disabled, I'm not going to go broke over that. If I need to go into continuing care, I'm not going to be starving over that. Those are the kind of things that allow a person to say, I'm not going to think so much about money. And I think that's why the people in those countries are so happy. They don't have to think about it. They're just enjoying their life.
Doug, thank you so much for this discussion. And I'm sure our viewers are going to be as Christian as I am.
It's always fun. Thanks for having me.
And all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening to this discussion on cruelty and how to overcome it. Until then, bye now.